Thank you. I'm going to talk about infrastructure in an organizational and policy perspective rather than purely technical, because it's something we've been dealing with a lot at Portico. So I'm going to share some of our experiences and talk about a specific example that I think can be applied to others. First, let me just tell you how Portico is positioned organizationally. It's part of a larger organization called Ithaca, which is a not-for-profit based in New York City that helps the larger academic community use digital technologies to do a number of things, preserve the scholarly record, but also to advance higher education, research, and teaching in sustainable ways. And Ithaca pursues this mission by providing a variety of services that aid in adoption of technologies. The first service we call S&R, Strategy and Research. It's a small research and consulting group that focuses on the transformation of scholarship and teaching in the digital environment. The second part of our organization, many of you may have heard of, is Jstor, which is a collection of scholarly journals in electronic format that's used by many researchers and students across the globe. And it's an access platform to disseminate these e-journals. Portico is the third piece of Ithaca, and its sole mission is to be a digital preservation service for e-journals, recently e-books as well, and other scholarly e-content. Now, we have a very specific definition of preservation at Portico, because we believe it's important to encompass these four different parts of preservation in everything we do. We believe that preservation must include usability, which means that the content must remain usable via whatever delivery mechanism is current. And so we make a commitment to migrate content within our dark archive as technology changes. The second piece we believe is critical is the authenticity of the information, that the provenance of the content must be proven. And we have relationships, contractual relationships with a large number of publishers so that they feed us their content directly that we preserve. We're getting it only from the source of the content, that is the publisher. Third, we believe that preservation is only useful if the content is discoverable. And so we believe that very strict high standards of bibliographic metadata are critical, and also that the metadata is attached to the content upon the ingest into the archive. It can't go in until that metadata is attached to it. And then finally, we believe that preservation must ensure accessibility in appropriate circumstances. And so we have what we call trigger events, which is a situation in which the content is no longer available from the source, usually the publisher, and at that point, and only at that point, we light up the content and make it available to its users. Now, as I said earlier, our whole mission, our core mission, is preservation. That's all that Portico does. So we offer the scholarly community the ability to support preservation through three separate services that parallel the kinds of content that they're delivering. We have electronic journals. As I said, more recently, we've just added an electronic book service because, as you know, that field is growing rapidly. And we also have what we call D-collections, or digitized collections, which are large collections of primary and secondary source materials that you might find in things like the Gale publishers' collections of primary sources. We also preserve those. We have a two-sided business model in which the support comes, financial support comes from both the libraries who participate, that is, they, by participating, ensure that if they lose access to content through a publisher, they will get it from Portico. But we're also supported by the publisher participants who support Portico to take in their content and make sure that it will always be available to libraries. We are also the first preservation archive to be certified as what is called a trustworthy digital repository by the Center for Research Libraries in the US in 2012. Just some basic facts and figures, mostly to give you a sense of how large Portico has become over the 11 years it's been developing. So we have over 200 participating publishers, over 900 libraries are participants. We have over 400 million files. We just passed an important landmark of 28 million e-journal articles. Many books growing. The book collection is growing more rapidly than anything else at the moment. And then, as I said, we have these 1.5 million digitized newspaper primary source collections. And we have 10 triggered journals. And that's important because it indicates that, we don't hope that journals disappear, but they do. And over the years, we're now up to 10 journals that would no longer be available to users were it not that they were preserved in Portico. Now, we're talking a lot here about what makes a digital preservation organization or service trustworthy. And over the years, we've come up with some things that we believe are critical points to becoming and remaining a trustworthy preservation organization. As I said, you have to have a clear definition and mission of preservation, that's always going to be what you do. You need to be transparent regarding your preservation processes and the status of the content. So we have an easily usable audit site that every participant can see. It's basically a window into where the content is and what stage of the process it's at. And when it's in the archive, you can see as a library it's there, and as a publisher that your content has been safely ingested. You need to indicate that you have reliable delivery of service over time, and when a trigger event is required, you need to respond very quickly. A willingness to be audited and results reported to the broad community. An ability to collaborate with others to find common solutions, and this is important for what I'm going to say next about leveraging work. And then finally, a capacity and willingness to handle future preservation needs. I believe we need to be looking ahead and have some research and development on a very small scale, but some scale, so that we're not going to be left unable to deal with what's coming up. And we're currently involved in an important partnership with the British Library, in which Portico is basically providing preservation services for the British Library to help them deal with the recently enacted legal deposit requirements in the UK. So since April of last year, in response to the British Library's request to us, Portico has delivered articles in preserved format that we produce and then ship back to the British Library so that they can hold those preserved files on site and make them available to their users in the reading rooms of the British Library. We've worked with them for almost a year now, and we're now talking about the next group of publishers we'll be working on going forward. And the question I ask myself and I pose here is, can we leverage this work that we've done and the lessons we've learned from this partnership with the BL to perhaps help other national libraries or other international organizations with their legal deposit and other preservation needs? I think that we've learned a lot from this partnership with the British Library, and I call this both scaling up in terms of leveraging our work and expertise more broadly, but also scaling out in that it's taught us a lot about what makes partnerships work and what the challenges are. We've had to honestly improve our workflow and policies to keep up with the needs of the British Library. They've required a monthly transmission of data. That's not something we do for ourselves. We work on a slower scale and a slower schedule, but we've had to change our processes to conform to their needs. Second, we've had to enhance our communication protocol. That's a fancy way of saying that communication has provided more challenges than technology in an international partnership like this. We've had to develop more efficient use of staff expertise on both sides of the partnership so that Portico staff can really focus on what we know, and the British Library staff can focus on being a national library for the UK, and we can share our expertise without duplicating it. Next, we've had to leverage existing relationships with publishers. Now, we have relationships with many, many publishers, many of whom are also British Library publishers. And so we've been able to use these agreements we have to add a very simple addendum to them to make them usable for this British Library partnership. If we didn't have those existing relationships, the British Library would have had to start fresh, negotiating with all of these publishers to create preservation agreements. We've provided preservation solutions overall that have reduced the costs and increased capacity for preservation for a much broader community of participants. And as I said, it's allowed each partner to focus on core activities rather than duplicating what the others are already doing very well. So what are future challenges for us and for the community? I think this long tail of small publishers and libraries who are not participating in any preservation solution at all is critical for us to take on together as a community. It's harder to reach the small groups than it is to reach the big established publishers and the research libraries, but we can't forget about them. New forms of scholarly content, my colleagues have already touched on this, but there's born digital scholarship, there's executable software, there's all sorts of new things that we're going to have to figure out fairly quickly how to preserve. The exponential growth in data in need of preservation, and specifically something we're working on and worried about, is the connection between the data and the published article, which often reside in very different places. That link often gets broken, and we're working on some research on how to make sure that the link between the published article and the data underlying it remains permanent. And then, as I said, I believe there's a need for more partnerships and generally more collaboration to make sure that we're not paying multiple times to develop the same tools, infrastructure, and expertise that many of us can contribute because we already have them in our own organizations. Thank you very much.